impression that the perspective of poorer countries and cities has been less represented. This is the reason why today we invited an EU expert that conducted one of the few analyses about the impact of CBAM on the most vulnerable countries, and he is Tim Gore. Tim is the head of the Climate and Circular Economic Program at the Institute for European Environmental Policy, and he is also a board member at Climate Action Network Europe, CAN Europe. Welcome also to Tim. And then we have the two representatives of the African continent, Parvin Ngala, who is currently the regional director for Oxfam International of the Horn, East and Central Africa region and of the Southern African cluster. Welcome, Parvin Ngala. And finally, we have with us Dimas Sinoia. He's a research and project lead at Centro para Democracia e Desenvolvimento in Mozambique. Welcome to Dimas Sinoia. So I hope that all participants can stay with us until the end, so you will be able to interact with our speakers in the Q&A. I remind again that if you want to address questions to Mohammed Chahim, please do it before 12 because he has to leave earlier. So with that, let's go to our first panelist, Mohammed Chahim. So you have been appointed rapporteur of the file. You have presented a draft report on CBAM in December, and we know that you have received more than 13,000 amendments on the report. This confirms that the file received a lot of interest and also that you have been very busy. Can you tell us what is the status of play of the file in the Environmental Committee? What are the main changes that your report wants to introduce, and especially in relation to the topic of today? And what can we expect from the next week vote? Thanks. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Pataturo. Thank you for having me. I think it's a very important topic to discuss, and I've never walked away from this very important element, I think, of this legislation. I mean, from day one, I've always thought about, okay, how can we make this legislation work, and how can we make sure that it doesn't over proportionally affect least developed countries. Not only because I have a strong passion for justice, and not only within the EU, but also in relation to other countries, but also because I believe that I think we need to have, there's a strong responsibility that I feel the Global North has in order to make sure that climate a problem is solved. I think we need to show much more, and the question is then, how can this be best addressed? Again, my position was clear from day one. I think you've read my draft report in December. I don't think you can have a better position because I stated that all revenue should go in order to help countries that are affected by this legislation, more specifically least developed countries. Of course, you can go for an exemption, but I don't think that that's the right signal, and also there's no political majority for that. So as it stands now is that I believe that there will be a majority that wants to help financially and administratively to support LDCs when it comes to CBAM, and that we will take our responsibility to increase international climate finance. I think these are the two most important elements. How exact we can, how explicit and how exact we can be next week is still, I mean, we are finalized. We just finalized it, but you know, you have to understand that, you know, whenever you have some kind of revenues and the whole process of how to allocate this, there are a lot of technicalities involved. So I think as we are going to propose it now, I think is not perfect, but is acceptable. So where we acknowledge the position of LDCs, that we want to help them both financially and administratively, and that we want to make sure that we take our responsibility when it comes to international climate finance. I think this is the most important thing. And of course, I've also seen how a country like Mozambique is affected or can be affected by CBAM regulation. And this is not something that I want to see become reality. So we have to understand what are the things that we can do in the short run to help a country as Mozambique. By the way, and this is not something that I want to say lightly. Again, I understand the position of least developed countries. I want us as the EU to have an open and good relation with, for example, a continent as Africa. By the way, I was born in Africa, so I have a strong relation with the continent. And again, the goal of CBAM is to decarbonize globally. That's our goal. And there are different instruments to get there. CBAM is one of them. And we want to make sure that we use all the instruments, all legislation that we have in place in order to reach our Paris Agreement as we have agreed upon in the past. And one of these elements will be our contribution to international climate finance and how we deal from a day-to-day basis with the CBAM legislation, the transitional period that we've introduced, the data that will be collected, the assessment of the administrative burden also for LDCs, of course, will be part of that. I think as an intro, I think this is sufficient because then we have enough and more time to debate and discuss and maybe answer some of the questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine. Thank you very much for this introduction and for your work on the file and for trying to take into account the impact of CBAM on the poorer countries. We can now maybe go a bit more into the topic and hear from the author of the research titled "What Can Climate Vulnerable Countries Expect from the CBAM?" And we have here Tim Gore. Tim, you can unmute yourself and activate the camera. So the question to you would be, what did you find out in your research and which countries are the most affected?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Chiara. Thanks, Chahim, for the introduction. Thanks for having me. Good to be with you all. And I think, as Mr. Chahim says, this is very timely, obviously, because the legislative process on the CBAM is now entering a really critical stage. And it's still the case, I think, that most of the voices from outside of the EU that are engaging with this topic are from larger emerging economies, middle-income countries, and there's still been, I would say, not enough engagement, or we haven't heard enough still from smaller, least developed, climate vulnerable countries. So events like this, finding spaces to hear those voices and to have representatives from those countries intervening in the EU policy debate is really important. So thanks for the opportunity. The piece of work that you're referring to, we produced last year before the proposal came out, but just to also try to encourage stakeholders from climate vulnerable countries to start to engage. We simply looked at the countries that could be affected by considering countries where the EU is a key export market in sectors that would be covered by the CBAM. And then also to look at the share of those exports as an overall share of the country's overall exports, and also to look at the potential carbon intensity of those countries. So essentially, where we have countries that are exporting goods that are covered by the CBAM proposal, where the EU is a significant export market for those countries, where those exports are a significant share of overall exports, and where those countries may have quite high, relatively high carbon intensity of production, then we can assume that they may be more impacted. And I think one of the takeaways is that there are climate vulnerable countries, particularly in Africa, who may be at least as adversely impacted as some of the emerging economies who are really dominating the discourse on this from outside the EU. And deserve also to be engaged in the debate. So obviously Mozambique is there, and we're going to hear much more about that. The aluminium sector, also the steel sector being relatively exposed. I would say also countries like Ghana and Cameroon also on aluminium. For steel, countries like Zimbabwe and Zambia. potentially Nigeria. And then I think also that a lot of the North African countries who are exposed, whose fertilizer exports to the EU are exposed, and a country like Morocco, who's to be impacted. So there are a group of countries there. They are impacted. They may have a very small share of EU imports, but nonetheless, for those countries, they may be impacted, and that's why it's important to keep them in the debate. And I know that Mr. Chahim has been concerned about this, and it's great to